In the luxurious penthouse overlooking Dubai's glittering skyline, 28-year-old Zara Mwangi gently rocked 3-year-old Layla Al-Rashid to sleep. The little girl's fever had broken hours ago, but she remained restless, whimpering softly in her silk-canopied bed. Zara's weathered hands, marked by years of hard labor, smoothed the child's damp curls with infinite tenderness. What happened next would shatter 2 decades of separation and reveal a truth that would change both their lives forever. But let's start from the beginning, in a place far from Dubai's towering glass monuments to wealth and power. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The scorching Kenyan sun had barely crept over the horizon when Zara began her daily journey from the cramped one-room shack she called home in Kibera, Nairobi's largest slum. At 28, she carried herself with a dignity that seemed impossible given her circumstances. Her faded yellow dress, carefully mended countless times, was always clean despite having no running water. Her shoes, donated by a charity years ago, had holes that let in the red dust of the unpaved roads, but she walked with purpose through the maze of corrugated metal homes and open sewers. Zara had been working as a live-in nanny for the Al-Rashid family for 3 years now, a position that required her to stay in their Dubai mansion 6 days a week, returning to Kenya only on Sundays to visit her elderly aunt, Mama Njeri, the only family she had ever known. The job paid well by Kibera standards, enough to send money for her aunt's medication and to slowly save toward a dream that seemed increasingly impossible: finding her own family. The Al-Rashid family didn't know Zara's story, and she preferred it that way. To them, she was simply the quiet, capable woman who had transformed their household. Ibrahim Al-Rashid, a prominent oil executive, and his wife Fatima had hired her through an agency after their previous nanny had quit without notice. They needed someone immediately. Their daughter Layla was only 6 months old then, and both parents traveled frequently for business. What they found in Zara exceeded every expectation. She wasn't just a caretaker. She was a guardian angel who seemed to understand Layla's needs before the child could express them. Under Zara's care, the fussy, colicky baby had blossomed into a happy, curious toddler who spoke her first words in both Arabic and Swahili, much to her parents' amazement. But Zara carried secrets that weighed heavier than the designer baby strollers she pushed through Dubai's air-conditioned malls. She had no memory of her early childhood, no knowledge of where she truly came from. Her earliest clear memory was of being found, barefoot and terrified, outside a refugee camp in northern Kenya when she was 8 years old. The aid workers said she kept repeating a name, Amara, but couldn't remember if it was her own name or someone else's. They had given her the name Zara because she needed something for the official papers. Mama Njeri, a kind woman who worked at the camp, had taken her in despite having barely enough food for her own 3 children. "You were like a ghost, child," Mama Njeri had told her years later. "You wouldn't speak for months, just stared at the horizon as if you were waiting for someone to come back for you." The only clue to Zara's past was a small silver bracelet she'd been wearing when they found her. The delicate chain held a tiny pendant with Arabic script that none of the locals could read. Over the years, she'd shown it to various people, but no one could tell her what it meant. She wore it always, hidden beneath her sleeve, a constant reminder of the family she'd lost and might never find. Working for the Al-Rashids had been both a blessing and a torture. Their wealth was beyond anything she could have imagined. Marble floors that gleamed like mirrors, crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow patterns on the walls, and a nursery filled with toys that cost more than most families in Kibera earned in a year. But it wasn't the luxury that affected her most deeply. It was watching Ibrahim Al-Rashid with his daughter. Every evening, when he returned from his office, Layla would run to him with outstretched arms, squealing, "Baba!" with pure joy. The sight of their reunion, the way his stern business face would melt into tenderness, how he'd scoop her up and spin her around while she giggled, created an ache in Zara's chest that she couldn't name. She wondered, almost daily, if somewhere in the world someone had once held her that way. If there was a father who had spun her in circles, a mother who had sung her to sleep, siblings who had played with her in some distant courtyard. The not knowing was a constant companion, as familiar as her own shadow. The Al-Rashid mansion was a sprawling white stone palace in Emirates Hills, Dubai's most exclusive neighborhood. Each morning, Zara would wake in her small but comfortable room on the third floor, a space larger than the entire shack she shared with Mum and Jerry in Khyber, yet somehow less like home. The room had everything she needed: a comfortable bed, a private bathroom, air conditioning that hummed quietly through the desert heat, and a window that looked out over the family's perfectly manicured garden with its imported palm trees and infinity pool. But comfort couldn't fill the emptiness that had lived inside her chest for 20 years. Her daily routine was predictable and comforting in its structure. She would wake at 5:30, perform her morning prayers on the small prayer mat she kept beside her bed, then dress in one of the modest uniforms Mrs. Al-Rashid had bought for her. Simple, well-made dresses in soft colors that were more expensive than anything she'd ever owned. By 6:15, she was in the kitchen, preparing Layla's breakfast and organizing the day's activities. The kitchen was a temple of modern efficiency: stainless steel appliances, granite countertops that sparkled under recessed lighting, and a pantry stocked with ingredients from around the world. Yet Zara felt most at home here, surrounded by the familiar ritual of nurturing others. Layla would wake around 7, and those first moments of the day were always Zara's favorite. The little girl would appear in the doorway of her bedroom, hair tousled from sleep, clutching her favorite stuffed elephant, and pad across the marble floor in her tiny pink slippers to wrap her arms around Zara's legs. "Good morning, my sunshine," Zara would whisper in English, then repeat it in Swahili. "Habari ya asubuhi, jua langu." Layla was learning both languages naturally, switching between them with the fluid ease that only children possess. Their days were filled with quiet adventures. They would spend mornings in the garden, where Zara taught Layla the names of flowers in 3 languages: English, Arabic, and Swahili. They would have picnics on the living room floor when the afternoon heat made the outdoors unbearable, reading picture books and building elaborate castles with wooden blocks imported from Germany. But it was in the evenings, after Mr. and Mrs. Al-Rashid returned from their respective offices, that Zara felt most like an outsider. The family would gather in the main sitting room, a vast space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Dubai skyline, and she would retreat to the background, still present but no longer central to the day's rhythm. She would watch. Then from the kitchen doorway, as Ibrahim helped Layla with simple puzzles, as Fatima read to her from Arabic storybooks, as the 3 of them cuddled on the massive sectional sofa while cartoons played on the wall-mounted television that was larger than most rooms in Khyber, these moments reminded Zara of her place in their world. She was essential but not permanent, cherished but not family. She was the woman who knew that Layla preferred her sandwiches cut into triangles, who could stop the child's nightmares with a gentle song, who had been there for every milestone. Nanda, first steps, first words, first successful use of the potty, yet she was also the woman who would one day be replaced when Layla no longer needed a nanny, who would return to Kenya with references and savings, but without the child who had become the center of her universe. This contradiction was the defining tension of Zara's life. She loved Layla with a fierceness that sometimes frightened her, yet she knew their relationship had an expiration date. She had given the child everything she had to give: her time, her attention, her heart, while holding back just enough to protect herself from the inevitable goodbye. But on this particular Tuesday evening in March, as thunderclouds gathered over Dubai's desert landscape and Layla's fever climbed higher despite the medicine, Zara would discover that some connections transcend employment contracts and social boundaries. Some bonds are written in blood and memory, in languages that the heart speaks before the mind can understand. As she sat beside Layla's bed, watching the child's restless sleep, Zara had no idea that her entire understanding of who she was and where she belonged was about to change forever. The silver bracelet beneath her sleeve seemed to grow warm against her skin, as if responding to some invisible signal, some cosmic alignment that had been 20 years in the making. The storm outside was building, but the real tempest was about to unfold in the quiet sanctuary of a child's bedroom, where a lullaby from the past would unlock secrets that had been buried by time, trauma, and an ocean of tears that had been shed in silence for 2 decades. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The grandfather clock in the Al-Rashid mansion's marble foyer had just chimed 11 when Zara realized that conventional methods weren't going to work. Layla's fever had spiked again, despite the pediatrician's prescribed medication, and the child was becoming increasingly agitated, tossing in her bed and whimpering in a way that broke Zara's heart. Dr. Hassan had assured the family that it was just a common childhood virus, nothing serious, but seeing Layla suffer brought back memories that Zara usually kept locked away. Fragments of her own childhood illness, being cared for by strangers who spoke in hushed, worried tones. The feeling of being lost, scared, and desperate for the comfort of someone who truly understood. Ibrahim and Fatima Al-Rashid had retired to their master suite an hour ago, trusting Zara completely to handle the night watch. This wasn't unusual. Over 3 years, they had come to rely on her instincts with their daughter more than their own sometimes. But tonight felt different. Tonight, Zara felt an overwhelming urge to reach deeper into herself, to find something that might soothe Layla in a way that medicine couldn't. She dimmed the nursery lights until only a soft, warm glow emanated from the hand-painted lamp on the side table. The room, decorated in soft pastels with whimsical murals of flying carpets and Arabian Nights, felt like a sanctuary, suspended between the chaos of the world outside and the innocence of childhood dreams. Layla stirred restlessly, her small hands clutching at the silk sheets, her breathing shallow and rapid. Zara pulled the rocking chair closer to the bed, a beautiful piece crafted from Lebanese cedar that Fatima had chosen personally, and settled into its familiar embrace. She had spent countless hours in this chair, feeding Layla as a baby, reading stories, simply watching over her sleep. But tonight, as she looked down at the fevered child, something stirred in the deepest recesses of her memory. Not a clear recollection, but rather a sensation, like trying to remember a dream upon waking. Her hand unconsciously moved to the silver bracelet hidden beneath her long sleeve, her fingers tracing the unfamiliar Arabic script that had been her only connection to a past she couldn't remember. And then, without conscious thought, words began to form on her lips, not in English or Swahili, the languages of her known life, but in Arabic. Fluid, melodic Arabic that seemed to flow from some hidden well within her soul. Nam ya Habibti, Nam ya Nuri. Sleep, my beloved. Sleep, my light. The words surprised her even as she spoke them. Where had they come from? She had never formally studied Arabic beyond the basic phrases necessary for her job with the Al-Rashids. Yet these words, this melody, felt as natural as breathing, as familiar as her own heartbeat. Layla's restless movements began to slow, her breathing becoming deeper and more rhythmic. Encouraged, Zara continued, her voice growing stronger and more confident with each verse. Nam ya habibti nam ya nuri, fil layl yimshi bala nujum, wa ana alayki baharis, min kul sharwa min kul huzn. Sleep, my beloved, sleep, my light. The night walks without stars, and I watch over you from all evil and from all sorrow. The melody that accompanied these words was unlike anything Zara had ever heard herself sing. It was ancient, haunting, filled with a longing that seemed to echo across generations. Her voice, usually soft and measured in her daily interactions, took on a richness and depth that surprised her. It was as if she was channeling something beyond herself, tapping into a wellspring of music and memory that had been dormant for decades. As she sang, fragments of images began to flash through her mind. A woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair sitting beside a bed much simpler than this one, warm hands braiding her hair while humming this same melody. The scent of jasmine and cardamom floating through an open window. A man's deep voice joining in the lullaby, creating harmony that filled a small lamplit room. But these weren't her memories, were they? They couldn't be. Zara had been found alone, with no family, no past beyond the refugee camp. Yet, the emotions attached to these fleeting images felt achingly real. Love, safety, belonging, the absolute certainty of being cherished. Layla had grown completely still now, her fever-flushed cheeks relaxing into peaceful sleep. But Zara couldn't stop singing. The words continued to pour out of her as if they had been waiting 20 years for this moment of release. Ya nur aini, ya ruh albi, inti binti wa ana ummik, fil ghani wa fil faqr, sabihti ma'aki wa ma'ani. O light of my eyes, O soul of my heart, you are my daughter, and I am your mother in wealth and in poverty. My nature is with you and with me. The words caught in her throat as their meaning registered. Why was she singing about mothers and daughters, about being together? Through wealth and poverty? These weren't typical lullaby lyrics, yet they felt essential, necessary, as if they contained some vital truth she needed to understand. Zara's hands trembled as she continued to rock, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper as she repeated the refrain. The nursery felt different now, charged with an energy she couldn't name. The familiar room, with its imported toys and designer furniture, seemed to fade around the edges, replaced by shadows of another place, another time. She closed her eyes and let the music carry her deeper into whatever hidden chamber of her memory these songs were emerging from. In her mind's eye, she saw a courtyard filled with orange trees, their blossoms heavy with perfume. Children playing in the dappled sunlight that filtered through the leaves. A fountain in the center, its gentle splash providing a constant, soothing rhythm, and in the midst of this scene, a family. A father with serious dark eyes and gentle hands, a mother whose voice was honey and silk as she sang these same lullabies, siblings, an older brother who carried her on his shoulders, a younger sister who followed her everywhere. All of them gathered in the evening air, sharing stories and songs as the call to prayer echoed from a nearby mosque. But how could these be her memories when she had no family, when she had been found alone and afraid in a refugee camp? The contradiction was maddening, yet the emotions attached to these images were undeniably real. She could feel the texture of her mother's silk scarf, smell the distinctive blend of spices that always clung to her father's clothes, hear her brother's laughter as he taught her to write her name in Arabic script. Arabic script, like the writing. On her bracelet, Zara's eyes snapped open, her hand flying to her wrist. The small silver pendant felt warm against her palm, almost pulsing with its own rhythm. For the first time in years, she pulled back her sleeve and looked closely at the delicate Arabic writing etched into the metal. In the soft light of the nursery, the script seemed to shimmer, each curve and line holding secrets she had never been able to unlock. But now, with her mind still swimming in half-remembered melodies and phantom memories, the symbols looked different, familiar, as if she had once known exactly what they meant. She traced the letters with her finger, and suddenly, impossibly, she could read them, not with her eyes, but with something deeper, a recognition that bypassed conscious thought and went straight to her heart. Amara bint Khalil. Amara, daughter of Khalil, Amara. The name the aid workers had said she kept repeating when they now found her, not the name of someone else, but her own name, her real name. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't Zara Mwangi, the girl with no past who had been found outside a refugee camp. She was Amara, daughter of Khalil, and these lullabies weren't mysterious gifts from some unknown source. They were her inheritance, passed down through blood and breath from a family she had been torn away from, but had never truly forgotten. But if this was true, if she really was Amara, then where was the family she was remembering? What had happened to separate them? And why, after all these years of working for the Al-Rashids, was she remembering now? Layla stirred slightly in her, asleep, a small smile crossing her face as if she was dreaming of something beautiful. Zara's voice had trailed off, but the child remained peaceful, her fever finally breaking as her small body relaxed into healing rest. Zara sat in the rocking chair, her mind reeling with questions and possibilities that seemed too enormous to contain. The silver bracelet felt different now, not like a mysterious relic from an unknown past, but like a key that had finally found its lock. The Arabic lullabies continued to echo in her memory, each verse revealing new layers of meaning, new glimpses into a life she had lived before trauma had stolen it away. Outside, the storm that had been building all evening finally broke. Rain, lashing against the tall windows of the nursery. But inside, in the warm circle of lamplight surrounding a sleeping child and a woman discovering her true self, there was perfect stillness. A moment of profound recognition that would change everything. Though Zara didn't yet understand how, she pulled her sleeve back down, covering the bracelet once more. But she could still feel its presence against her skin, no longer a burden of questions, but a beacon, guiding her toward answers she had stopped believing she would ever find. Tomorrow, she would have to make sense of what had happened tonight. Tomorrow, she would have to figure out what to do with the knowledge that she was not who she had believed herself to be for 20 years. But tonight, she simply sat with the miracle of recovered memory, humming softly under her breath as Layla slept peacefully at last, both of them wrapped in the protective embrace of songs that had traveled across time and loss to find their way home. Omar Al-Rashid had not intended to return to Dubai that night. His flight from London was supposed to land the following morning, but an unexpected cancellation had put him on an earlier connection, bringing him home at nearly midnight to the family mansion where his brother Ibrahim lived with his wife and daughter. At 35, Omar carried the weight of being the eldest son in one of the Gulf's most influential families. While his younger brother Ibrahim managed the family's oil ventures, Omar oversaw their vast real estate empire, a responsibility that kept him traveling constantly between London, New York, and Dubai. Tonight's early return was a rare gift, a chance to surprise his beloved 3-year-old niece Layla, whom he hadn't seen in nearly 2 months. But as Omar's driver pulled through the electronic gates of the Emirates Hills compound, he noticed something that made him pause. Lights were still on in the third-floor nursery, casting a warm glow across the manicured gardens below. It was well past midnight, far too late for Layla to be awake unless something was wrong. Concern quickened his steps as he let himself into the house with his private key, moving quietly across the marble foyer. So as not to wake Ibrahim and Fatima, the elevator carried him silently to the 3rd floor, where he could hear something that stopped him cold in the hallway. Singing. A woman's voice, achingly beautiful, rising and falling in a melody that seemed to reach into his chest and squeeze his heart with invisible hands. But it wasn't just any song. It was a lullaby he hadn't heard in 23 years, sung in a voice that carried the same haunting quality he remembered from his childhood. The same melody his mother used to sing to his baby sister before she... Omar's hand went to the wall, over support, as the memories crashed over him. His sister Amara, 5 years old, with dark curls and eyes that sparkled with mischief. The day she had vanished during their family's vacation in Kenya, swept away in the chaos of a terrorist attack on their hotel. The months of searching, the false leads, the gradual acceptance that she was gone forever. His mother had never recovered from the loss. She had sung Amara's lullabies every night for years afterward, as if her voice could somehow call her daughter home across whatever distance separated them. When their mother died 10 years ago, those songs had died with her, or so Omar had believed. Now, hearing the melody drift through the partially open nursery door, he felt as if he were falling through time itself. His hands shook as he approached the room, his businessman's logic warring with an impossible hope that he had buried so deep he had forgotten it existed. Through the crack in the door, he could see a woman sitting in the rocking chair beside Layla's bed. Her back was to him, but her voice was clear and strong as she sang the ancient Arabic words that had once filled his childhood home. Ya Nur Aini, Ya Ruh Albi, Inti Binti wa Ana Ummik. Omar's breath caught in his throat. Not only did she know the words, but she sang them with the exact phrasing, the same subtle variations that had made his mother's version unique. These weren't lyrics someone could have learned from a book or recording. They were too personal, too specific to his family's tradition. But how was that possible? The woman had to be Layla's nanny, the one Ibrahim had mentioned in passing. A Kenyan woman who had been with them for several years. There was no conceivable way she could know songs that belonged to the Al-Rashid family alone, unless... Omar pushed the thought away as quickly as it formed. It was impossible. His sister would be 28 now, a grown woman. The child they had lost was gone forever. The authorities had made that clear after years of investigation. The attack at the hotel had been devastating, chaotic. Bodies had been found in the Indian Ocean weeks later, though none had been identifiable after so long in the water. Yet as he stood frozen in the hallway, listening to this stranger sing his sister's lullaby with his mother's exact intonation, Omar felt something crack open inside his chest. A door he had sealed shut 23 years ago was being forced open by the impossible beauty of a voice that sounded like coming home. The woman in the chair had begun to rock gently, and now Omar could see her profile in the soft lamplight. She was African, as Ibrahim had said, with strong, elegant features and skin that glowed with health despite the late hour. Her hair was pulled back in a simple style, and she wore the kind of modest dress that the family's household staff typically chose. But there was something about the curve of her jaw, the way she held her head when she sang, that made Omar's heart race with a recognition his mind refused to accept. She looked familiar in a way that went beyond logic, beyond the bounds of reasonable explanation. As if sensing his presence, the woman's voice grew softer, trailing off into a gentle humming. Layla appeared to be sleeping peacefully, her fever finally broken. The woman rose from the rocking chair with graceful care, checking the child's temperature with the back of her hand before smoothing the blankets around her small form. And then she turned toward the door. Omar found himself staring into eyes he had searched for in every crowd for 23 years. Dark brown eyes flecked with gold, set in a face that was undeniably older and more mature than the 5-year-old he remembered, but unmistakably, impossibly familiar. Time stopped. The mansion's expensive climate control system hummed quietly. In the background, Rain continued to patter against the windows, but in that charged space between the nursery door and the hallway where Omar stood, the entire universe seemed to hold its breath. The woman, his sister, his mind whispered despite all rational protest, stared back at him with an expression of growing shock. Her hand flew to her throat, then to her wrist, where Omar could see the edge of something silver beneath her sleeve. Amara? The name escaped his lips as barely more than a whisper, spoken in the Arabic that had been their mother tongue before. Everything changed. Her eyes widened impossibly, and Omar saw her legs begin to shake. She grabbed the doorframe for support, her face cycling through a dozen emotions in as many seconds: confusion, recognition, disbelief, hope, terror. She began in English, then stopped. Her hand was pressed against her wrist now, covering something Omar couldn't quite see. How do you know that name? The question hit him like a physical blow. She didn't remember him. Of course she wouldn't. She had been so young when they were separated, and trauma could steal memories as easily as it stole everything else. But the fact that she recognized the name, that it clearly meant something to her. "You're Amara," Omar said, stepping closer despite her obvious distress. "Amara bint Khalil, daughter of Layla Al-Rashid, my sister." She shook her head, backing away from him, but her movements were uncertain, as if her body was betraying her. Mine's protests. "No, I'm Zara Mwangi. I work for your family. I'm just—" "Show me your wrist," Omar said quietly. The words seemed to strike her like lightning. She clutched her arm against her chest, her eyes filling with tears she clearly didn't understand. "I don't know what you're talking about." But even as she spoke, her other hand was moving of its own accord, pulling back the sleeve to reveal a delicate silver bracelet with a small pendant. Omar's vision blurred as he saw the familiar Arabic script that their father had commissioned from a master jeweler in Damascus, a unique piece created for his youngest daughter's 5th birthday. Birthday she had never lived to celebrate because she had disappeared 3 days before the party. "Amara bint Khalil," Omar read the inscription aloud, his voice breaking on their father's name. "Our father gave you that bracelet. You wore it every day until the day that changed everything. The day their family's vacation in Kenya had turned into a nightmare of explosions, screaming and chaos. The day his baby sister had been in the hotel's children's area when the attack began. The day she had vanished in the evacuation that followed. The woman, Amara, was crying. Now, silent tears streaming down her face as she stared at the bracelet as if seeing it for the first time. "I've worn this for 20 years, she whispered. "I never knew what it meant. The writing, tonight I could finally read it, but I thought I was imagining things." "You weren't imagining anything," Omar said, his own tears flowing freely now. "You're my sister. You're our Amara. We searched for you for years. Our parents never stopped believing you were alive, but—" "Our parents?" she asked, her voice small and broken. Omar's heart shattered as he realized what he had to tell her. "Father died 5 years ago. Heart attack. Mother, she died 10 years ago. She never got over losing you. She sang your lullabies every night until the end, hoping somehow you would hear them and find your way home." Amara's legs gave out then, and she sank to the floor in the nursery doorway. Omar was beside her instantly, catching her before she could fall, his arms going around her with the same protective instinct that had made him carry her everywhere when she was small. "I don't remember," she sobbed against his shoulder. "I have. These flashes, these images, but I don't remember our family. I don't remember you." "It doesn't matter," Omar whispered fiercely, holding her as if she might disappear again. "You're here now. You're alive. That's all that matters." And in that moment, as brother and sister held each other in the soft light of a sleeping child's nursery, 23 years of grief and loss began to transform into something else entirely. The miraculous, impossible joy of a family being restored against all odds. Layla stirred in her bed, smiling in her sleep as if she could sense that something wonderful was happening nearby. The storm outside had passed, leaving the air clean and clear, full of promise for the dawn that was still hours away. But for Omar and Zara Al-Rashid, dawn had already broken, bringing with it the light of a truth that would reshape both their lives in ways they were only beginning to understand. Dawn crept slowly across Dubai's skyline, painting the glass towers in shades of gold and amber, but inside the Al-Rashid mansion, time seemed suspended in an impossible moment of disbelief. Omar had insisted they move to his private study on the second floor, away from Layla's nursery, where their emotional reunion might wake the sleeping child. The study was Omar's sanctuary, floor-to-ceiling shelves lined with leather-bound books, in Arabic, English and French, a massive mahogany desk inherited from their grandfather, and floor-to-ceiling windows that normally offered a commanding view of the city. But this morning, heavy curtains remained drawn, creating an intimate cocoon where two people could grapple with a truth that defied everything they thought they knew about their lives. Amara sat rigidly in one of the burgundy leather chairs, her hands clutched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. The silver bracelet lay open on the coffee table between them, its delicate chain catching the light from the desk lamp Omar had switched on. The Arabic inscription seemed to glow in the warm illumination. Amara bint Khalil. Proof of an identity. She couldn't fully remember but couldn't deny. Omar occupied the chair across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to hide. Every few seconds, his expression would shift. Wonder, joy, grief, and something that looked like fear all cycling through his dark eyes. She could see him searching for traces of the little girl he had lost, trying to map the woman she had, become onto memories that were over 2 decades old. "Tell me about Kenya," Omar said quietly, his voice still hoarse from the tears they had both shed. "Tell me how you survived." Amara's throat constricted. The story she was about to tell wasn't the fairy tale reunion that movies promised. It was a tale of loss, confusion, and a childhood spent wondering why she felt so fundamentally displaced in the only world she could remember. "I don't remember the attack," she began slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "My earliest clear memory is being in a medical tent at a refugee camp near Dadaab, maybe 3 months after it happened. The aid workers said I had been found by a military patrol, wandering alone in the bush, about 50 kilometers from where the hotel was bombed." Omar's face went white. 50 kilometers? How did you... "No one knows." Amara's voice was steadier, now drawing strength from the clinical recounting of facts that had shaped her life. "I was severely dehydrated, malnourished, and had head trauma that the doctors said explained my memory loss. They estimated I had been walking for days, maybe weeks. I should have died out there." She paused, remembering the stories Mamanjeri had told her about her condition when she was found. A walking ghost, the older woman had called her, alive but not really living, like someone whose soul had been partially severed from her body. "The aid workers tried to find my family," Amara continued. "They had protocols for reuniting displaced children, but I couldn't tell them anything useful. I knew my name was Amara, I kept repeating it, but I had no memory of parents, siblings, or where I had come from. The bracelet was the only clue, but none of the local translators could read the Arabic script properly." Omar's hands clenched into fists. "We were searching too. For months, we had teams combing every refugee camp, every hospital, every orphanage. In Kenya and Somalia. How did we miss you?" "Because I wasn't registered under the right name," Amara said. understanding dawning in her voice. Mama Njeri, the woman who took me in, she said they called me Amara for the first few weeks, but when the official registration happened, there was confusion. The camp administrator misheard or miswrote the name, and I became Zara. By the time I was coherent enough to correct it, months had passed, and Zara was the name on all my documents. The cruel irony of it was staggering. A simple administrative error, a mispronounced name in a chaotic refugee camp, had kept her hidden from the family that was desperately searching for her. While the Al-Rashids were looking for a girl named Amara, she was being cared for under the name Zara, invisible to their increasingly desperate search efforts. "There's something else," Amara said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "Something I never told anyone, not even Mama Njeri." Omar straightened, sensing the importance of what she was about to reveal. Sometimes, especially when I was younger, I would have these episodes, flashbacks the camp doctor called them. I would suddenly start speaking Arabic, fluent, perfect Arabic, but I had no memory of learning it. I would describe places I had never been, mention people I couldn't identify. And always, I would ask for someone named Omar. The words hit him like a physical blow. Omar's eyes filled with fresh tears as he realized what this meant. Your subconscious remembered me. Even when everything else was gone, some part of you knew I existed. The episodes terrified Mama Njeri, Amara continued. She was a devout Christian, and she thought I might be possessed or cursed. She took me to pastors, traditional healers, anyone who might help. Eventually, the episodes stopped happening, usually when people prayed over me or gave me medications to calm down. I learned not to mention them. Omar stood abruptly, pacing to the window and pulling back the curtain to stare out at the city below. 23 years, he said, his voice thick with self-recrimination. 23 years you've been an hour's flight away from Dubai, and we never found you. You couldn't have known, Amara said softly. I didn't even know myself until last night. But Omar was lost in his own spiral of guilt and what-ifs. I gave up, he confessed, turning back to face her. After 5 years of searching, after our mother's health started failing from the grief, I convinced our father to stop the investigation. I told him we had to accept that you were gone, that continuing to search was destroying what was left of our family. The admission hung between them like a physical barrier. Amara could see the weight of that decision in every line of his face, the burden he had carried for nearly 2 decades. Our father never forgave me for that, Omar continued. He kept looking on his own, quietly, until the day he died. Private investigators, internet searches, DNA databases. He never stopped, believing you were out there. And he was right. He was right, and I was wrong. Amara rose from her chair and crossed to where he stood by the window. For a moment, she hesitated. This man was still essentially a stranger to her, despite the DNA they shared and the memories he carried of their childhood together. But something deeper than conscious thought guided her hand to his shoulder. You were protecting your family, she said firmly. You were trying to save your parents from more pain. That's what a good son does, what a good big brother does. Omar turned to look at her, his eyes red-rimmed but desperate. Do you remember anything about us, about our family? Please tell me something survived. Amara closed her eyes, reaching deep into the places in her mind that she had avoided exploring. For most of her adult life, the flashbacks and half-memories that had once frightened her now felt like precious gifts waiting to be unwrapped. I remember safety, she said slowly. The feeling of being completely safe and loved. I remember a voice reading to me in Arabic, stories about brave princesses and magical horses. I remember someone teaching me to write my name, guiding my hand with infinite patience. That was me, Omar whispered. I taught you to write. You were so proud when you could finally spell Amara without help." "And I remember laughter," she continued, her own voice growing wonderstruck as more fragments surfaced. "So much laughter, playing games in a garden with orange trees, someone carrying me on their shoulders, making me feel like I could touch the sky." "Our father's orange grove," Omar said, his voice breaking. "Behind our house in Damascus. You used to make me race around the trees with you on my back until we were both dizzy." More memories were surfacing now, like stars appearing as the sky darkened. Amara could almost smell the orange blossoms, could almost feel the warm Damascus sun on her face as she rode her big brother's shoulders through their family's private paradise. "There's something else," she said, her hand moving instinctively to the bracelet on the table. "I remember the day I got this. A birthday party that never happened?" Omar nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "Your 5th birthday. Father had commissioned the bracelet months in advance. He was so excited to give it to you. We were supposed to have a huge celebration when we got back from Kenya. All your friends, a princess theme, because you were obsessed with fairy tales. The bracelet was going to be the grand finale present, the party that never was, the birthday that turned into a memorial." Amara felt the weight of all the lost years pressing down on her, not just her own lost childhood, but her family's. Lost daughter, lost sister, lost dreams of watching her grow up. "Ibrahim doesn't know," Omar said suddenly, the realization hitting him. "My God, Ibrahim doesn't know his daughter's nanny is his sister." Amara's stomach lurched as the practical implications of their discovery began to dawn on her. "What are we going to do? I can't just... how do we explain this? I've been caring for his daughter for 3 years. I've been living in their house, eating their food, taking their money." "You've been family," Omar corrected firmly. "You've been family all along. We just didn't know it." But even as he spoke, they both understood the complexity of what lay ahead. There would be questions, investigations, DNA tests to confirm what their hearts already knew. There would be media attention once word got out that Layla Al-Rashid's lost daughter had been found alive after more than 2 decades. There would be legal complexities around her Kenyan citizenship, her identity documents, her entire constructed life. And underneath all the practical considerations was the emotional minefield they would have to navigate. How do you rebuild a relationship with a sibling you don't remember? How do you mourn parents you can't recall while celebrating a family you're only just discovering? "One step at a time," Omar said, reading the overwhelming uncertainty in her expression. "First, we wake Ibrahim. Then we figure out the rest together." Amara nodded. Though every instinct she had developed over 23 years of survival was screaming at her to run, this new reality was too big, too overwhelming, too full of implications she couldn't process. But as she looked at Omar, really looked at him, she began to see traces of the brother her heart remembered, even if her mind did not. The protective way he positioned himself between her and the door. The patience in his eyes as he waited for her to process each new revelation. The unconditional love that radiated from him, despite the years and trauma that separated them. Maybe some bonds really were stronger than memory. Maybe some connections could survive even the most devastating attempts to sever them. As the sun climbed higher outside the study windows, Amara took a deep breath and prepared to step fully into a life she had never dared to imagine could be hers. The conversation with Ibrahim and Fatima had not gone as anyone expected. What should have been a joyous family reunion had instead triggered a crisis that threatened to tear the Al-Rashid household apart in ways none of them had anticipated. Ibrahim's initial reaction had been pure disbelief, followed by anger that Omar would perpetrate what he saw as a cruel hoax. "You expect me to believe that the woman who has been changing my daughter's diapers is our dead sister?" he had shouted, his usually composed demeanor cracking under the impossibility of the blame. "This is insane, Omar, completely insane." Fatima's response had been even more devastating. The woman who had trusted Amara with her most precious possession, her daughter, now looked at her with suspicion and fear. "If you're not who you said you were," she had whispered, backing away from Amara as if she were dangerous, "then who else are you lying about? What else have you been hiding?" The DNA test Omar insisted upon would take 3 days to process, even with the expedited service that money could buy. 3 days during which Amara found herself suspended between identities, belonging fully to neither the life she had built as Zara nor the family heritage she was only beginning to understand as Amara. The mansion that had been her home for 3 years suddenly felt like a prison. Ibrahim had immediately suspended her duties with Layla, pending clarification of the situation, which meant the child she had raised and loved was now off-limits to her. Fatima had moved their daughter to the master suite, creating a physical barrier that felt insurmountable. Omar had arranged for Amara to stay in one of the mansion's guest suites, luxurious accommodations that felt like exile when she could. Heard Layla crying for Auntie Zara from down the hall, tears that she was no longer allowed to soothe. On the second day of her strange limbo, as afternoon prayers echoed from the nearby mosque, Amara sat in the guest suite sitting area, staring at a collection of family photographs that Omar had brought from his apartment. The images were meant to trigger memories, to help her reconnect with the childhood that trauma had stolen. Instead, they made her feel like an intruder peering into someone else's life. Here was a family portrait from Damascus. Their father, Khalil, distinguished and serious, their mother, Yasmin, elegant in a way that spoke of generations of refinement. Omar as a teenager, tall and protective even then, and there, in the center, a little girl with dark curls and sparkling eyes, wearing a white dress and holding a stuffed rabbit. "That was taken 6 months before we lost you," Omar's voice came from the doorway. He had been checking on her every few hours, as if afraid she might disappear again. "You were obsessed with that rabbit. You named him Qasim and insisted he needed his own place setting at dinner." Amara studied the photograph, willing herself to feel some connection to the child staring back at her. But it was like looking at a stranger, a beautiful, beloved stranger, but a stranger nonetheless. "I don't feel anything," she admitted, her voice heavy with guilt. "I look at these pictures of our parents, of our life together, and it's like looking at someone else's family. What kind of daughter forgets her own mother's face?" Omar entered the room and settled into the chair across from her. The kind who survived something that should have killed her. The kind who was so young that forgetting was the only way her mind could protect itself. But his reassurances felt hollow. If she was truly an Al-Rashid, shouldn't she feel some instinctive recognition? Shouldn't there be some genetic memory that transcended trauma? "Tell me about our mother," Amara said, setting down the family portrait. "Tell me who she was when I knew her." Omar's expression softened, and for the first time since their discovery, he smiled genuinely. "She was magical. That's the only word that fits. She had this way of making the ordinary world feel full of wonder. She would turn our garden into an enchanted forest, our bathtub into an ocean where we could sail to distant lands. Everything she touched became part of an adventure." As he spoke, Amara closed her eyes and tried to feel her way toward these memories. Somewhere in the depths of her consciousness, she could almost grasp the edges of something warm and safe and infinitely creative. "She was the one who taught you Arabic," Omar continued. "Not in a formal way, but through stories and songs and games. She would have these elaborate tea parties where she would speak only in classical Arabic, and you would respond like a little princess holding court. You were fluent by the time you were 4, more fluent than children twice your age." That explained the lullabies that had poured out of her so naturally. Even when conscious memory failed, Her mother's linguistic gift had remained, buried but not destroyed. "What about our father?" Amara asked. Omar's expression grew more complex. He was intense, brilliant, successful but not easy. He loved us fiercely, but he was also demanding. He expected excellence in everything, our studies, our behavior, our representation of the family name. "But with you," Omar paused, something tender crossing his features, "with you, he was different. You were his weakness, his soft spot. You could get away with anything just by climbing into his lap and calling him Baba." Amara felt a stirring of something, not quite memory, but a warmth that might have been the echo of unconditional love. "Did he really keep looking for me, even after you stopped?" "Until the day he died," Omar confirmed. "He had this study in our Damascus house that he turned into a command center. Maps, photographs, contact information for every aid organization. In East Africa, he would spend hours there every day, following up on leads, coordinating with investigators. When he died, we found journals filled with notes about possible sightings, potential matches. 23 years of hope written in his own hand. The weight of that dedication was staggering. While she had been learning to survive in Kibera, rebuilding her life from nothing, her father had been fighting a different kind of war, refusing to accept loss, refusing to stop believing in the impossible. "How do I live up to that?" Amara whispered. "How do I be worthy of that kind of love when I can't even remember the man who gave it?" "You don't have to earn it," Omar said firmly. "It was yours, from the moment you were born. Nothing that happened, not the attack, not the memory loss, not the years apart, changed that. You're still his daughter. You're still our Amara." But the doubt that had been Amara's constant companion for 23 years wasn't so easily banished. She had spent her entire conscious life feeling displaced, like she didn't quite fit anywhere. Learning that she was an Al-Rashid should have answered those questions, should have provided the sense of belonging she had always craved. Instead, it had only highlighted how much she didn't know about herself, how much of her identity remained fractured and incomplete. That evening, as the call to prayer drifted across the city and the lights of Dubai began to twinkle in the gathering darkness, Amara made a decision that surprised even herself. She needed to see Mamanjeri. The woman who had raised her deserved to know the truth about Amara's discovery. More than that, Amara needed the wisdom of the woman who had helped her navigate every major transition in her life. If anyone could help her make sense of this impossible situation, it would be the woman who had seen her through everything from learning to read to finding her first job. Omar insisted on accompanying her to Kenya, despite her protests that she needed to make this journey alone. "You've been alone long enough," he said with the quiet authority of an older brother. "From now on, you don't face anything by yourself, unless you choose to." The flight to Nairobi was Amara's first time traveling as a passenger rather than an employee. Omar had booked them first-class seats, but the luxury felt wrong somehow, like wearing clothes that didn't fit. She found herself studying the other passengers, wondering if any of them could see the fraud she felt like, a slum girl pretending to belong in a world of wealth and privilege. "You're overthinking," Omar observed as they descended toward Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. "You don't have to become someone else just because you know who you really are." But that was exactly the problem. Amara had no idea who she really was. Was she Zara Mwangi, the survivor who had clawed her way out of Kibera through determination and hard work? Or was she Amara Al-Rashid, daughter of privilege who had been stolen from a life of comfort and opportunity? Could she be both? Could she be neither? The drive through Nairobi to Kibera was like traveling between different planets. Omar sat in stunned silence as their hired car navigated the increasingly crowded and chaotic streets, past vendors selling everything from phone credit to fresh fruit, past matatus packed with passengers, past children playing football with balls made of plastic bags and string. When they reached the edge of Kibera, the contrast became even more stark. Here was the reality of how the majority of Nairobi's residents lived, in a sprawling settlement of makeshift homes, unpaved roads that turned to mud when it rained, open sewers, and the kind of poverty that made luxury seem obscene. "This is where you lived?" Omar asked, his voice thick with emotion. "This is where I learned to live," Amara corrected. "Where Mum and Jerry taught me that dignity isn't about what you own, but about how you treat others." Mum and Jerry's reaction to seeing Amara arrive with a wealthy stranger was exactly what Amara had expected: suspicion mixed with protective concern. The older woman, now 73 and moving more slowly than when Amara had last seen her, immediately positioned herself between them and the modest shack that had been Amara's home base for so many years. "Who is this man?" she asked in Swahili, eyeing Omar's expensive clothes and confident bearing. "And why does he look at you like he owns you?" "He's my brother, Mama," Amara replied in the same language, then switched to English. "This is Omar Al-Rashid. He's my family, my real family." What followed was the most difficult conversation of Amara's life, explaining to the woman who had saved her, raised her, and loved her that she belonged to a different world entirely. Watching Mum and Jerry's face cycle through disbelief, hurt, and finally a kind of resigned understanding that cut deeper than any anger could have. "I always knew," the old woman said finally, settling onto the wooden chair outside her door. "I always knew you came from somewhere else. The way you moved, the way you spoke when you had those episodes. You carried yourself like someone who expected the world to be beautiful. But you're still my mother," Amara said desperately, kneeling beside her chair. "You're the one who raised me, who taught me right from wrong, who showed me how to survive. Blood doesn't change that." Mum and Jerry's weathered hand cupped Amara's face with infinite tenderness. "No, my child, blood doesn't change that. But knowing who you really are, that changes everything else." The DNA results arrived on a humid Thursday morning via encrypted email to Omar's secure account. As he read the clinical language that confirmed what their hearts already knew, 99.997% probability of sibling relationship, Amara felt nothing but a hollow ache where relief should have been. "It's official," Omar announced, turning his laptop screen toward her in Mum and Jerry's small living space. The cramped room felt even smaller with his presence, his expensive watch and tailored shirt a stark reminder of the worlds that were colliding. In ways none of them had anticipated, Mum and Jerry, who'd been quietly preparing chai on her small charcoal stove, looked up with an expression that mixed vindication with loss. "I told you yesterday," she said simply. "Her mother knows her child, and I knew from the moment I saw you together that he was your blood. But knowing and accepting were two different things entirely." The past 4 days in Kibera had forced Amara to confront questions that went far beyond genetics. Who was she really? Could she honor both the life that had saved her and the heritage that claimed her? And most pressingly, did she even want to return to a family that had already rejected her once? The call from Ibrahim came an hour after. Omar shared the results. His voice was strained, formal, completely unlike the warm employer who had trusted her with his daughter for 3 years. "The test is conclusive," he said without preamble. "I owe you an apology for my reaction, but this situation, it's unprecedented. We need to discuss how to move forward." What he didn't say, but what Amara heard clearly, was the underlying question. "Now that we know who you are, what do we do with you?" The conversation that followed, conducted over speakerphone in Mum and Jerry's modest home, was one of the most difficult of Amara's life. Ibrahim's questions came in rapid succession, each one highlighting the complex web of implications their discovery had created. The legal ramifications alone are staggering. Ibrahim said, his business mind immediately jumping to practical concerns. Your employment contract, your visa status, the fact that you've been working under false identity documents. The authorities will have questions we can't easily answer. Amara felt each point like a physical blow. In revealing her true identity, she had inadvertently criminalized herself. Everything she had built, her legal residency in the UAE, her work history, her carefully constructed life, was now suspect. Then there's the media concern, Ibrahim continued relentlessly. When this gets out, and it will get out, the story will be everywhere. Lost Al-Rashid daughter found working as nanny. The press attention will be intense, invasive. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny? Ibrahim, Omar interrupted, his voice carrying a warning edge. She's our sister, not a public relations. Problem to be managed. She's both, Ibrahim replied coldly, and pretending otherwise won't protect any of us from the consequences. But the most devastating blow came last, delivered with the clinical precision that had made Ibrahim successful in business but was crushing when applied to family dynamics. There's also the matter of Layla, he said. My daughter has formed an attachment to someone who was essentially living a lie. The psychological impact of this revelation, the questions about trust, about the authenticity of relationships, these are concerns that Fatima and I can't ignore. Amara's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. The implication was clear. Her presence in Layla's life was now seen as potentially harmful rather than nurturing. The child she had raised, loved and protected was being protected from her. You want me to disappear? She whispered into the phone, her voice breaking. You want me to go away and pretend this never happened? The silence that followed was answer enough. That's not what he's saying, Omar said firmly, but his uncertainty was evident. The family unity he had hoped for was fracturing under the weight of reality. Isn't it? Amara asked, looking directly at Omar. He's listing all the reasons why. Knowing me is a problem, all the ways my existence complicates their perfect life. That evening, as the sunset painted Kibera in shades of gold and amber, Amara sat outside Mamanjeri's home, watching children play football in the narrow alley between the corrugated metal houses. Their laughter echoed off the walls, pure and uncomplicated. A sound she remembered from her own childhood in this place, the only childhood she could actually recall. You're thinking of staying, Mamanjeri observed, settling beside her on the wooden bench they had shared for countless conversations over the years. I don't know where I belong, Amara admitted. I thought finding my family would answer that question, but it's only made everything more confusing. You belong wherever you choose to build your life, the older woman said pragmatically. Blood is important, but it's not everything. Look at us. No shared genes, but 20 years of shared love. What is that worth? It was a question that got to the heart of everything Amara was struggling with. She loved Mamanjeri with the fierce loyalty of a daughter, respected her wisdom, cherished their bond. But she also felt an undeniable pull toward the family she had lost, toward the life that might have been. I can't choose between you, Amara said desperately. I can't choose between the woman who saved me and the family I was born to. Then don't choose, Mamanjeri said simply. Who says you have to pick only one identity? You can be both Zara and Amara. You can love both your families. The only person demanding you choose is you. The wisdom in those words was profound, but implementing it seemed impossible. How could she bridge two worlds so fundamentally different? How could she honor both the struggles that had shaped her and the privilege she had inherited? The answer began to emerge over the following days, as Amara spent time in the community that had raised her. She visited the school where she had learned to read, talked with former neighbors who remembered her childhood, spent hours with the other young women who had grown up alongside her in Kibera's challenging environment. What she discovered was that her story, a girl who had overcome impossible odds to build a meaningful life, was not unique in its broad strokes, but extraordinary in its details. Everyone in Kibera had stories of loss, displacement, and resilience, but few had the opportunity to bridge the gap between their origins and a life of greater possibility. "You could be a bridge," suggested Mary Wanjiku, a childhood friend who now ran a small tailoring business from her home. "You understand both worlds, the struggle and the success. That understanding is rare and valuable." The idea began to take shape slowly, like dawn breaking over the sprawling settlement. What if her discovery wasn't just a personal miracle, but an opportunity to create something meaningful for the community that had given her life? Omar arrived 3 days later with news that would change everything. He had been busy in Dubai, working behind the scenes to address the legal and practical challenges that Ibrahim had raised. But more importantly, he had been fighting for Amara's place in their family with a determination that reminded her why she had instinctively trusted him. "I've spoken with our lawyers," he announced, settling into Mamanjeri's small living space with a briefcase full of documents. "Your legal status can be resolved. We can establish your true identity while preserving your right to work and live wherever you choose. It's complicated, but it's manageable." More significantly, he had convinced Ibrahim to reconsider his position, not through arguments about family obligation, but through a practical proposal that aligned with both their business interests and Amara's newly emerging vision for her future. "We want to establish a foundation," Omar explained, his excitement evident. "Educational and medical support for displaced children, particularly in East Africa. Someone who understands both the needs of these communities and the resources available to address them would be invaluable in running such an organization." The proposal was elegant in its simplicity. Amara would use her unique position, her understanding of both worlds, to create bridges for others who were struggling with displacement and lost opportunities. She would honor her past while embracing her future, serve her community while accepting her heritage. "You would be the Foundation's director," Omar continued, "based wherever you choose, Dubai, Nairobi, or splitting time between both. You would have the resources of our family behind you, but the autonomy to develop programs that you believe will make a real difference." It was everything she hadn't dared to dream of. A way to belong to both families, serve both communities, and build something meaningful from the complexity of her identity. But the most important validation came from an unexpected source. Ibrahim called that evening, his voice lacking the cold formality that had characterized their previous conversations. "Layla has been asking for you," he said without preamble. "Every day since we explained that you needed to travel to see your family. She doesn't understand the complications. She just knows that Auntie Zara, who sings her to sleep and makes her laugh, is gone." Amara's heart clenched. "How is she?" Confused, sad, asking questions we don't know how to answer. Ibrahim paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "I realized something this week. I've been so focused on protecting her from the complexity of this situation that I forgot the most important thing. You love her, and she loves you. That love isn't diminished by who you really are. If anything, it's more precious, because it was given freely without obligation." "Ibrahim, come home, Amara," he said, using her real name for the first time. "Come home and help us figure out how to be the family we're supposed to be. All of us." As Amara sat in Mamanjeri's living room, surrounded by the sounds and smells of the community that had shaped her, she felt something shift inside her chest. Not the anxiety and confusion that had plagued her for weeks, but a growing sense of possibility. She was Zara Mwangi, survivor and fighter, shaped by the resilience of Kibera. She was also Layla Al-Rashid, daughter of privilege, inheritor of resources and responsibility. She didn't have to choose between these identities. She could weave them together into something entirely new. "I want to accept Omar's proposal," she told Mum and Jerry that night, "but I want you to be part of it, not just as someone I visit, but as someone who helps guide the foundation. Your wisdom, your understanding of what these communities really need, that's irreplaceable." Mama and Jerry's eyes filled with tears as she understood what Amara was offering. Not just financial security, but a partnership that honored the relationship they had built over 20 years. "You want an old woman from Kibera to work with wealthy Al-Rashids?" she asked, but her smile indicated she was already imagining the possibilities. "I want the mother who raised me to help me figure out how to use this miracle for good," Amara replied. "I want us to build something together that honors both the life you gave me and the family I've found." For the first time since Omar had spoken her true name in the nursery, Amara felt like she was moving towards something rather than running from something. The obstacles were still there. Legal complications, family dynamics, media attention that would inevitably come, but they no longer felt insurmountable. She had found her identity not by choosing between her past and her future, but by refusing to let anyone force her to choose at all. 6 months later, Amara stood before the most intimidating audience of her life. The ballroom of the Burj Al Arab Hotel glittered with crystal chandeliers and was filled with Dubai's elite. Oil executives, royal family members, international philanthropists, and media representatives from across the Middle East and Africa. Tonight was the official launch of the Layla Al-Rashid Foundation for Displaced Children, named in honor of the father who had never stopped believing his daughter would come home. But this wasn't just a charity gala. For Amara, it was the ultimate test of whether she could successfully bridge the two worlds that had shaped her, whether she could speak authentically to both the privileged audience before her and the communities she aimed to serve. The months leading up to this moment had been a whirlwind of preparation, legal proceedings, and the delicate work of rebuilding family relationships that had been fractured by decades of loss and weeks of misunderstanding. The legal challenges had been more complex than anyone anticipated. Establishing Amara's true identity while maintaining her right to work internationally required navigating immigration laws in 3 countries. Her Kenyan citizenship, earned through 23 years of residence, had to be preserved while restoring her UAE birthright. The process involved testimonies from Mum and Jerry, DNA evidence, psychological evaluations to document her memory loss, and statements from the refugee organizations that had helped her as a child. The media attention that Ibrahim had feared materialized exactly as he predicted, but in ways none of them had expected. The story broke when a leaked photo of Amara and Omar, together at the UAE embassy in Nairobi, made its way to a gossip blog. Within hours, lost Al-Rashid heiress found working as nanny was trending across social media platforms. The coverage ranged from sympathetic human interest stories to sensationalist speculation about everything from her motives to her mental health. Paparazzi stationed themselves outside the Al-Rashid mansion. Reporters attempted to interview former neighbors in Kibera. Old photographs of the terrorist attack that had separated her from her family were republished with new context. But perhaps the most challenging test had been rebuilding her relationship with Layla. The 3-year-old couldn't understand why her beloved Auntie Zara had suddenly become someone else, why the adults around her spoke in hushed tones about complicated things she couldn't comprehend. The child's confusion manifested as tantrums, sleepless nights, and a heartbreaking tendency to cling to Amara while simultaneously pushing her away. "She's protecting herself," Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the child psychologist they had consulted, explained during one of their family sessions. "Children are remarkably adaptable, but they need consistency to feel secure. Layla's world has been fundamentally altered, and she's trying to make sense of it." The solution had required patience and creativity. Rather than trying to explain the complicated truth, they had focused on reassuring Layla that love remained constant even when circumstances changed. Amara was still the same person who sang lullabies and told stories and made her feel safe. Those things hadn't changed. Just because her name was different, gradually, tentatively, Layla had begun to accept this new reality. She started calling Amara Auntie Amara instead of Auntie Zara, treating it like an interesting game rather than a traumatic shift. More importantly, she had begun referring to Omar as Uncle without prompting, instinctively recognizing the family connection that genetics had created. The work of developing the foundation had provided a welcome focus during these months of adjustment. Working with Omar and a team of development experts, Amara had crafted programs that addressed the specific challenges she understood intimately. Educational support for displaced children, medical assistance for families in refugee settlements, and mentorship programs that helped young people navigate the transition from survival to opportunity. But the Foundation's mission went beyond traditional charity work. Amara had insisted on a component that honored the wisdom of communities like Kibera, programs that recognized the resilience and resourcefulness that existed within these settlements, rather than simply treating residents as recipients of aid. Mwangi had become the Foundation's Community Advisory Director, a role that utilized her decades of experience working with displaced families while providing her with resources she had never imagined having access to. Her presence in Dubai, living in a comfortable apartment near the Foundation's offices, had been a source of stability for Amara during the challenging months of transition. The Foundation's board included Omar and Ibrahim, along with several other prominent philanthropists and development experts. But Amara held the decisive vote as Foundation Director, ensuring that programs remained grounded in the real needs of the communities they served, rather than the preferences of wealthy donors. Now, as she stood at the podium looking out at an audience that included government ministers, ambassadors, and some of the wealthiest individuals in the region, Amara felt the weight of everything that had led to this moment. The success or failure of tonight's presentation would determine not just the Foundation's funding, but whether she could successfully claim her place in both worlds. She had prepared extensively for this speech, working with media consultants and communication experts to craft a message that would resonate with this sophisticated audience. But as she looked out at the sea of expectant faces, she made a decision that would have terrified her 6 months earlier. She set aside her prepared remarks. "Good evening," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's excellent acoustics. "6 months ago, I was a woman named Zara Mwangi who washed dishes and changed diapers and sang lullabies to a little girl who had become the center of my world. Tonight, I stand before you as Layla Al-Rashid, daughter of this city, inheritor of privilege I never knew I possessed." A murmur rippled through the audience. This wasn't the polished presentation they had expected. "I could tell you about the programs we're launching, the communities we hope to serve, the measurable impact we intend to achieve. Those details are in the materials you've received, and they're important. But what I want to share with you tonight is something more fundamental. What I've learned about the distance between worlds that seem impossibly far apart." She paused, finding Mwangi in the audience. The older woman sat at a table near the front, wearing an elegant dress that Amara had helped her choose, her presence a reminder of the journey they had traveled together. When I was 8 years old, I was found wandering in the Kenyan bush, traumatized and alone, with no memory of where I had come from. The woman who saved me, who raised me, who taught me everything I know about survival and dignity and love, is here with me tonight. Mwangi, would you please stand? The spotlight found Mwangi, who rose gracefully despite her obvious discomfort with the attention. The applause that followed was respectful but uncertain. The audience wasn't sure what they were witnessing. For 20 years I lived in Kibera, one of Nairobi's largest slums. I learned to make soap from scratch because we couldn't afford to buy it. I walked 2 kilometers each way to fetch water from a communal tap. I studied by candlelight because electricity was a luxury we couldn't afford. And I was happy because I was loved, because I had purpose, because I was part of a community that took care of its own. Amara's voice grew stronger as she spoke, drawing energy from the truth she was sharing. 3 years ago, I became a nanny for the Al-Rashid family. I entered a world of marble floors and infinity pools, of organic food flown in from Europe, and toys that cost more than most families earn in a month. It was beautiful, comfortable, safe, but it was also isolated in ways that took me time to understand. She could see Ibrahim and Fatima at their table, Layla sleeping peacefully in Fatima's arms despite the late hour. Their expressions were intent, supportive, encouraging her to continue. The distance between these worlds, between Kibera and Emirates Hills, isn't just about money. It's about understanding. It's about the assumptions we make about people based on their circumstances. It's about the stories we tell ourselves, about who deserves opportunity and who deserves to be forgotten. The ballroom had grown completely silent. Even the wait staff had stopped moving, drawn in by the raw honesty of her words. When I discovered my true identity, I thought I had to choose between these worlds. I thought becoming Amara Al-Rashid meant abandoning Zara Mwangi. But what I've learned is that both identities are real, both are valuable, and both are necessary for the work we're here to do tonight. She gestured toward the presentation screens that displayed images from the Foundation's pilot programs. Children in Kibera receiving educational support, families in refugee camps accessing medical care, young adults participating in mentorship programs. The Layla Al-Rashid Foundation isn't about charity. It's about recognition, recognizing that every child has potential regardless of where they start. It's about creating bridges between worlds that have been kept artificially separate. It's about understanding that poverty isn't a character. Flaw and wealth isn't a character virtue. They're just circumstances that can be changed with the right support and opportunities. Omar was smiling now, his pride evident even from across the ballroom. This wasn't the speech they had planned, but it was exactly what needed to be said. Tonight, I'm asking you to invest not just in programs and initiatives, but in a different way of seeing the world. I'm asking you to believe that the distance between where someone starts and where they can end up is not as vast as it appears. I know this because I am living proof that circumstances don't determine destiny. They just determine the starting point. The applause began slowly, building gradually as the audience processed what they had heard. But Amara wasn't finished. The little girl who was lost in the Kenyan bush 23 years ago needed someone to believe she was worth saving. Mwangi provided that belief. The young woman, trying to build a life in one of the world's most challenging environments, needed someone to see her potential. The Al-Rashid family provided that opportunity. Tonight, I'm asking all of you to be that person for children who are still waiting, still hoping, still believing that someone will recognize their worth. As she concluded her remarks and the applause thundered through the ballroom, Amara felt something she had never experienced before, the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. She wasn't Zara pretending to be Amara, or Amara trying to forget Zara. She was both, fully and authentically, using every experience that had shaped her to create something meaningful for others. The fundraising that followed exceeded every projection. Pledges poured in, not just from the wealthy individuals in attendance, but from corporations wanting to partner with the foundation, from government agencies offering collaboration opportunities, from other non-profits seeking to learn from their approach. But the real measure of success came later that evening, as Amara stood on the hotel's terrace overlooking the Persian Gulf, surrounded by her family, both the one she had been born to and the one that had saved her. Layla was asleep in her arms, having woken during the reception and insisted on staying close to Auntie Amara. Omar and Ibrahim flanked her on either side, while Mamanjeri sat nearby, her eyes bright with tears of pride. "You found your voice. Tonight," Omar said quietly. "Not just as an Al-Rashid or as someone from Kibera, but as yourself, all of yourself." Amara looked out at the glittering lights of the city that had become her home, then down at the sleeping child who had been the bridge between her identities. She thought about her father, who had died, still believing she would come home, and her mother, whose lullabies had survived even when memories couldn't. The test was over. She had proven to herself and to the world that she could be authentic in any setting, that she could honor all aspects of her identity while serving something larger than herself. The foundation was launched, the family was healing, and the future was full of possibilities she was only beginning to imagine. Most importantly, she had learned that coming home didn't mean returning to a place you had left. Sometimes it meant creating a place where all parts of yourself could finally belong. 2 years after that transformative night at the Burj Al Arab, Amara stood in the courtyard of the newly completed Layla Al-Rashid Educational Center in Kibera, watching as children who had once been deemed unreachable by traditional systems demonstrated advanced mathematics concepts to a delegation of education ministers from across East Africa. The center was unlike any facility that had ever existed in the sprawling settlement. Built using sustainable materials and innovative design that respected the community's existing infrastructure, it served as both a school and a community hub. Solar panels provided reliable electricity, rainwater collection systems ensured clean water access, and the building's modular design allowed for expansion as programs grew. But the real innovation wasn't in the architecture, it was in the approach. Rather than imposing external educational models, the center had been developed in partnership with community leaders, incorporating traditional knowledge systems alongside modern curricula. Children learned mathematics through patterns found in local crafts, studied science through urban farming projects that provided food for their families, and developed literacy skills by documenting the oral histories of their elders. "Miss Amara," called out Jennifer, a 12-year-old who had become one of the center's most promising students. "The ministers want to know if our urban farming techniques could work in their countries too." Amara smiled, watching as Jennifer confidently explained the hydroponic systems that were producing fresh vegetables in spaces where nothing had grown before. 2 years ago, this child had been selling water in plastic bottles on street corners to help support her family. Now she was teaching agricultural innovation to government officials. The transformation wasn't just visible in individual success stories like Jennifer's. The entire dynamic of Kibera was shifting as the foundation's programs took root. Medical clinics partnered with traditional healers to provide culturally sensitive healthcare. Microfinance programs supported existing businesses rather than trying to replace them. Most importantly, young people who might have migrated to other cities in search of opportunity, were now finding ways to build meaningful lives within their own community. The ripple effects are extraordinary. Dr. Wanjiku Mbugua, the center's educational director, had told the delegation earlier that morning. When children succeed, families stabilize. When families stabilize, communities strengthen. When communities strengthen, they become engines of innovation rather than recipients of aid. Dr. Mbugua herself represented the kind of partnership that made the Foundation's work sustainable. A PhD in educational psychology from the University of Nairobi, she had grown up in Kibera and understood intimately both the challenges and the potential of the community. Her collaboration with Mama Njeri, whose formal education had ended in primary school, but whose wisdom about child development was unparalleled, had created educational approaches that neither could have developed alone. As the delegation toured the center's various programs, Amara reflected on how much had changed since that night when she had first sung Arabic lullabies to a fevered child. The Foundation now operated centers in 4 countries, had provided educational support to over 3,000 children, and had become a model for community-driven development that was being studied by universities worldwide. But the professional success, meaningful as it was, paled in comparison to the personal transformations that had unfolded alongside the Foundation's growth. Her relationship with Ibrahim and Fatima had evolved into something deeper than employer and employee, more complex than traditional siblings. They had become true partners in both the Foundation's work and the ongoing project of healing their fractured family. Ibrahim had surprised everyone by developing a genuine passion for the Foundation's mission, often spending weeks at a time, visiting program sites and working directly with community leaders. I never understood what privilege actually meant until I watched you bridge worlds I thought were incompatible, he had told her during one of their planning sessions. You've taught me that wealth is only meaningful if it creates opportunities for others to build their own wealth. Fatima's transformation had been even more dramatic. Initially skeptical of Amara's expanded role in their lives, she had gradually become one of the Foundation's most effective advocates, using her connections in Dubai's social circles to build support for programs that might otherwise have been dismissed as too radical or risky. Most importantly, their fears about Layla's adjustment had proven unfounded. Now 5 years old, the child had developed into a confident, curious little girl who was equally comfortable playing with children in Kibera during Foundation visits as she was attending birthday parties in Emirates Hills. She spoke Arabic, English and Swahili with equal fluency, and had developed a remarkable ability to adapt to different social environments without losing her authentic self. She's growing up understanding that people's circumstances don't define their worth. Amara had observed to Omar during one of their weekly calls. That's going to make her a better person and a better leader. Omar himself had made the most unexpected transformation of all. The successful businessman who had once been content to write checks for charitable causes had become actively involved in the Foundation's advocacy work, using his platform to challenge other wealthy individuals to move beyond traditional philanthropy toward more systemic approaches to social change. His relationship with Amara had deepened into the kind of sibling bond that transcended their lost years. They spoke almost daily, whether about Foundation business or personal matters, and he had become her most trusted advisor on everything, from program development to navigating the complex social dynamics of their expanded family. But perhaps the most meaningful transformation had been in Amara's relationship with her own identity. The young woman who had once felt like she belonged nowhere now understood that her sense of displacement had been preparation for a different kind of belonging, the ability to be authentically herself in any context while serving as a bridge between worlds that desperately needed connection. The afternoon's delegation visit concluded with a ceremony that had become traditional at foundation centers. A celebration where community members shared stories of transformation, not just their own, but the changes they had witnessed in their neighbors, their children, their entire community. Mwangi, now 75 and moving more slowly but still sharp as ever, served as the ceremony's elder, offering wisdom about resilience and hope that resonated across cultural and generational lines. Her role in the foundation had evolved beyond community advisory director to something more like a spiritual guide, helping both staff and program participants navigate the emotional complexities of systemic change. Change is like growing a tree, she told the assembled group, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. You plant the seed with faith, water it with commitment, and protect it through storms, but you cannot force it to grow faster than its natural time. What we see today, these children, these programs, this community, these are the fruits of seeds planted with love and tended with patience. As the ceremony concluded and the delegation prepared to leave, Amara found herself standing in the same spot where she had first met Mwangi 25 years earlier, outside the medical tent where she had been treated as a traumatized 8-year-old. The contrast was staggering. What had once been a place of crisis and displacement was now a thriving center of learning and opportunity. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ibrahim. Layla wants to know if she can video call to show Jennifer her new painting. Apparently they're collaborating on an art project. The message made Amara smile. Layla's friendship with Jennifer, facilitated by technology but grounded in genuine connection, represented everything the foundation was working toward: relationships that transcended circumstances, mutual learning that honored different experiences, and partnerships that created opportunities for everyone involved. As she prepared to leave for the airport and her flight back to Dubai, Amara was approached by Aisha, a 16-year-old who had been one of the center's first students and was now preparing to enter university on a foundation scholarship. Miss Amara, Aisha said, her voice serious with the weight of what she wanted to express. I know you probably hear this a lot, but I need to say it anyway. Before the center opened, I thought my only choices were to leave Kibera or accept that I would never have real opportunities. Now I understand that I can stay and create opportunities, not just for myself, but for others too. What will you study at university? Amara asked, though she already knew the answer. Educational psychology, like Dr. Mbugua, Aisha replied with determination. I want to come back and help design programs for the next generation of children. I want to be part of proving that where you start doesn't determine where you finish. As Amara settled into her seat on the plane that evening, watching Nairobi's lights fade below her, she thought about the circular nature of the journey she had traveled. From a lost child in Kenya to a successful woman in Dubai and back to Kenya. As someone who could create opportunities for other lost children, the geography had been important, but the real journey had been internal. Her phone contained dozens of messages from around the world, updates from other foundation sites, invitations to speak at conferences, requests for consultations from organizations wanting to replicate their model. The work had grown beyond anything she had imagined that night when she first discovered her true identity. But the message that meant the most was a simple voice note from Layla, recorded before her bedtime in Dubai. Good night, Auntie Amara. Mwangi taught me a new song today, and I want to sing it for you when you get home. I love you. Home. The word carried new meaning now. It wasn't a place defined by geography or economics or family trees. It was the space where all parts of herself could exist authentically, where her past and present and future could coexist, where love could transcend circumstances and create possibilities that had never existed before. As the plane climbed toward cruising altitude, carrying her back to the family that had never stopped believing she would come home, Amara closed her eyes and hummed softly under her breath. The melody was one of the Arabic lullabies that had first revealed her true identity, but the words that came to her now were new, in English and Swahili and Arabic all woven together, a song of gratitude for the journey that had brought her. To this moment, she was Zara Mwangi, the survivor who had learned to thrive against impossible odds. She was Amara Al-Rashid, the daughter who had found her way home after 23 years. She was the bridge between worlds, the voice for the voiceless, the proof that love could transcend any circumstance. Most importantly, she was exactly who she was meant to be, living exactly the life she was meant to live, surrounded by a family that had been built not just by blood, but by choice, commitment, and the revolutionary understanding that everyone deserves to belong somewhere. The Foundation's work would continue to grow, the programs would reach more children, the model would be replicated in new communities. But tonight, as she flew through the darkness toward the lights of Dubai, where her niece waited to sing her a new song, Amara was simply grateful for the miracle of being found, not just by her family, but by herself. In finding her identity, she had discovered her purpose. In embracing her purpose, she had created a new definition of home. And in building that home, she had opened doors for countless others to find their own way back to themselves. 5 years after that first night, when Arabic lullabies had unlocked buried memories, Amara stood in the garden of the restored Al-Rashid family home in Damascus. The Syrian conflict had finally ended, and the family had made the emotional decision to return to their ancestral home, not to live permanently, but to reconnect with roots that had been severed by decades of war and loss. The orange grove that Omar had described from their childhood had been replanted, young trees stretching toward the Mediterranean sun in neat rows that echoed the memory Amara had recovered of riding on her father's shoulders through these same pathways. The fountain in the center courtyard bubbled peacefully, its sound mixing with the laughter of children who were exploring the restored gardens. Today wasn't just a homecoming, it was a celebration. The first graduating class of the Khalil, Al-Rashid Foundation's University Scholarship Program, was receiving their degrees in a ceremony that brought together families from across East Africa and the Middle East. 37 young people who had started their educations in refugee camps, slums, and displaced communities were now doctors, engineers, teachers, and social workers, ready to return to their communities as agents of transformation. Among them was Jennifer, the girl who had once sold water bottles in Kibera and now held a degree in agricultural engineering from the University of Nairobi. Standing beside her was Ahmed, a refugee from Somalia who had become a pediatric nurse and would be opening a clinic in his former camp. Next to him stood Maria, a young woman from a displaced community in South Sudan who had earned her teaching credentials and planned to establish schools in areas where none had existed before. "Look at them," whispered Layla, now 8 years old and serving as an informal ambassador for the ceremony. She moved effortlessly between Arabic, English, and Swahili as she introduced the graduates to various dignitaries, her confidence a testament to growing up understanding that diversity was strength rather than division. "They're going to change the world," Mamanjeri observed, settling into one of the cushioned chairs that had been arranged under the orange trees. At 78, she remained sharp and engaged, her role as the Foundation's elder advisor having evolved into something approaching reverence among the communities they served. The ceremony itself was unlike any graduation Amara had ever attended. Rather than focusing solely on individual achievement, Each graduate was asked to share not just their own story, but the impact they intended to create for others. The pattern was consistent. These weren't young people who had escaped their circumstances, but leaders who had been empowered to transform them. "My name is Fatima Hassan," announced a young woman whose medical degree would take her back to a refugee camp in Jordan. 5 years ago, I watched my younger sister die from an illness that could have been easily treated if we had access to proper medical care. Today, I make a promise to my sister's memory and to every family still waiting for help. No child in our camp will ever again die from preventable causes. The applause that followed wasn't polite recognition, but genuine celebration of a promise that everyone present knew would be kept. This was the Foundation's true success, not just providing opportunities, but developing leaders who understood that their personal success was meaningless unless it created pathways for others. Omar, now serving as the Foundation's chairman, while maintaining his business interests, stepped forward to address the graduates. His remarks were brief but powerful, focusing on the responsibility that came with their education and the trust that their communities had placed in them. "You are not here because you were saved," he told them. "You are here because you were recognized for the potential that was always within you, recognized for your ability to solve problems that others had dismissed as unsolvable, recognized as the leaders your communities need." Ibrahim followed with practical information about the ongoing support networks that would assist the graduates as they established their careers. The Foundation's model had evolved beyond providing scholarships to creating ecosystems of support that continued long after formal education ended. But the most moving moment came when Amara herself addressed the group. Standing in the courtyard where she had played as a child, speaking to young people whose journeys paralleled her own in countless ways, she felt the profound circularity of life's unexpected gifts. 10 years ago, she began, I was a woman with no past, working in a job that felt temporary, dreaming of a future I couldn't quite envision. I thought my story was about loss, losing my family, losing my memory, losing my connection to any heritage that might define me. She paused, looking around at the faces gathered under the orange trees, graduates whose determination humbled her, family members whose love had sustained her, community leaders whose wisdom had guided her. What I understand now is that my story was never about loss. It was about preparation. Every challenge I faced, every skill I developed, every relationship I built was preparing me for this moment. Standing here with all of you, celebrating not what was lost, but what has been found. The response was immediate and overwhelming. These young people understood what she meant because they had lived their own versions of the same journey. They had transformed their pain into purpose, their displacement into determination, their struggles into strength that could uplift others. As the formal ceremony concluded and the celebration continued into the Damascus evening, Amara found herself walking through the restored house where she had spent the first 5 years of her life. The rooms had been carefully renovated to honor both their historical character and their role as a foundation center that would host programs for young leaders from across the region. In what had once been her childhood bedroom, now converted into a library filled with books in multiple languages, she discovered a wall display that Omar had commissioned without telling her. It contained photographs documenting her journey, from the refugee camp where Mamangeri had found her, through her years in Kibera, to her time with the Al-Rashid family in Dubai, and finally to the Foundation's work across multiple countries. But the centerpiece wasn't a photograph at all. It was her original silver bracelet, displayed in a custom case alongside a new piece that Omar had commissioned, a matching necklace with the same Arabic script, but with an addition: Amara bint Khalil, al-Mahrumin, Amara, daughter. Of Khalil, mother of the displaced. Do you like it? Omar's voice came from behind her. He had been watching her discover the display, waiting for her reaction. Mother of the displaced? She asked, touching the glass case gently. It's what they call you in the communities we serve, he explained. Not because you gave birth to them, but because you protect them, guide them, fight for them, the way a mother would. It's a title of respect that reflects what you've become. That evening, as the celebration wound down and families began their journeys back to homes across multiple continents, Amara stood on the roof terrace of the Damascus house, looking out over a city that was slowly healing from its own wounds. The lights twinkled below like stars, scattered across the earth, each one representing lives being rebuilt, dreams being pursued, futures being written. Layla appeared beside her, having escaped from the adults who were supposed to be supervising her bedtime routine. "Auntie Amara," she said, using the title that had evolved to encompass both their original relationship and their deeper family bond. "Maman Jerry says you can see the future from up here. Is that true?" Amara smiled, lifting the 8-year-old to sit on the terrace wall, her arms secure around the child who had been the bridge between her identities. "I think Maman Jerry means that being up high helps you see possibilities that are harder to notice when you're in the middle of everything." "What possibilities do you see?" Layla asked with the serious curiosity that characterized her approach to the world. Amara looked out over Damascus, then back at the house where 3 generations of their extended family were saying goodbyes that felt more like new beginnings. "I see children who don't know yet that they're going to become doctors and teachers and engineers. I see communities that don't know yet how strong they are. I see families that don't know yet how much love they're capable of sharing." "And what about us?" Layla asked. "What do you see for our family?" The question touched something deep in Amara's heart. Their family, biological and chosen, traditional and revolutionary, bound by blood and strengthened by commitment, had become something she never could have imagined that first night when she had sung Arabic lullabies to a fevered child. "I see us continuing to grow," she said finally, "not just in number but in understanding. I see us proving that families can be built in many different ways, that love can overcome any kind of separation, that home isn't a place you find, but a feeling you create." As if summoned by their conversation, the rest of the family appeared. On the terrace, Omar and Ibrahim, Fatima and Maman Jerry, along with several of the graduates who had become like extended family over the years of the Foundation's work. "Group photo," Ibrahim announced, holding up his phone, "for the family album that's going to need several volumes to contain everyone." As they arranged themselves for the picture, Amara felt overwhelmed by gratitude for the journey that had brought them all together. The little girl who had been found wandering in the Kenyan bush, the nanny who had sung lullabies in a Dubai mansion, the woman who had discovered her true identity through the love of a child she cared for. All of these versions of herself had led to this moment. The camera clicked, capturing an image that would join the hundreds of others documenting the Foundation's impact. But more than that, it captured the end of one story and the beginning of countless others. Stories of young people who would return to their communities with the tools and determination to create change. Stories of families reunited across distance and difference. Stories of love proving stronger than any circumstance that tried to divide it. Later that night, as Damascus settled into peaceful sleep around them, Amara hummed softly under her breath, the same Arabic lullabies that had first revealed her identity, but now filled with new meaning. They were no longer songs of mystery and lost memory, but melodies of celebration and infinite possibility. She was home. Not just in the geographic sense of returning to the place where she was born, but in the deeper meaning of belonging completely to herself and to the family she had both found and created. The circle was complete, but it was also expanding, encompassing new voices, new dreams, new definitions of what family could be when built on love, commitment, and the revolutionary belief that everyone deserves to belong somewhere. The future stretched ahead, full of challenges and opportunities, setbacks and breakthroughs. But whatever came next, Amara knew she would face it surrounded by love that had proven stronger than time, trauma, and any force that tried to separate families who were meant to be together. In finding herself, she had learned to help others find their way home too. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.